Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of season three of Menu Combat. I'm here joined by Ziad. You will know him from, I guess, what is it, Beach Gen Game Club,
Yes, sir.
and then obviously you know him as Wonder Magenta both on, I guess, Blue Sky and Twitter.
It's a little confusing. It's
Okay.
Warner Magenta on Twitter.
Okay.
It's Ziad with three Ds on Blue Sky. You'll find it.
Yes, yes. We'll put it in the show notes, and he's studying game design, and the way I've always described him as one of the people currently still connected to arcade game design philosophy in the space that we have now. And I wanted to have him on the podcast to talk about something that I think might have been a year ago. We had the conversation on Twitter, but I think it captures the spirit of something I want to think about, which is the idea of RPGs and repetitive encounters, repetitive game design. And I think he emblematically describes it a little bit in his FF16 review on his backlog, but I think the core essence is that in RPGs, there's always a redundancy of encounters, right? Like if you face, using Dragon Quest, one of my favorites of all time, if you face one slime once, you faced every slime every every time it shows up again. And I've been trying to figure out from my angle why that doesn't bother me as much and try to tease out how do we think about RPG design with these repetitive encounters? When is it interesting? When it's not interesting? And I think for someone who has much more of a language to talk about uh, combat encounters than I do, to hear some perspective, and I think I have a quote later from a friend of the show, Colton, who I think, given where something like Expedition 33 is going, what I think folks who are not too much RPG brained like myself are craving, and what does that mean for game design? Do I sum it up correctly, you think?
Yeah, thank you for the kind of intro. You got the Sephiroth of JRPGs on the podcast. I'll try to be on my best behavior today. So yeah, I guess to kick it off a little bit, I think in my mind I make this distinction between bespoke encounters and disposable encounters. Now that sounds a little judgmental. I
Yes.
don't mean it that way. I do
Right.
I do just mean it as a sort of factual kind of observation
Yes.
that okay, if you think an action game, I'd say as early as something like Final Fight, right? As classic beat 'em ups, you're funneled through a linear progression and the designers are very intentional with okay, we place this enemy here, we place him there. I think Resident Evil 4 is probably a lot of people's go-to example for like, wow, every single scene in this game feels so well directed and so intentionally planned out with how enemies are spaced. I think something like even the original Doom
Mm.
is very um it creates a significant amount of impact for the player just based on okay, we put this guy here and that guy there. I'm
Right. Very
describing very
curated.
surface level way, but I think with RPGs there is a tendency. So number one, in a lot of these games, the combat um happens in a separate instance. It doesn't happen sort of as part of exploration. Again, like Pokemon, Dragon Quest, all this basic stuff. And it's also, well, okay, once the encounter happens, the game decides, okay, which enemies do we give you? And then there can be some dynamism. Okay, some games may shuffle it around randomly, the set of enemies you're about to fight. Some games have set compositions of foes, but given the nature of EXP systems
Yes.
and progress, like the idea that progression even is a thing in these RPGs, which I think that is really important to stress. I'm gonna go into that in a second. There is also intuitively the idea that okay, we won't make you go through a linear progression over and over again. Instead, you just have zones where encounters can happen and then they will
Right.
naturally kind of repeat. Do you have like thoughts on that so far? Or,
I think I think one of my first questions are is that given that I think you described it well, it's like almost as in a particular zone, they have, let's say, seven encounters in that space, and then they're doing some form of mathematical choice of this arrangement of enemies will show up, or
Yeah.
this arrangement based on whatever randomness. I think one of my questions for you are with that idea is that how do you feel about those subtle changes going I'm imagining it's like you go to a dungeon in Final Fantasy 1, you notice a new encounter enemy, you learn that, and then later you have like usually 3 to 4 experiences. One, that encounter repeats wholesale again. One where it's paired with a different type of enemy. Or two, you deal with that enemy, and this is where I'm thinking about later in the dungeon where it's like it's the same solution, same technique, but because you're withered down by the nature of the dungeon, because you're withered down by the repeated action, or highlighting something else you highlighted where it's like you are stuck in exploration and then now this enemy interrupts that exploration phase that you have in your brain. Does that still feel, when does that change, or when do those small nuances feel useful versus not useful? Because I feel like in a
Mhm.
Pokemon world, it's like we can talk about capturing, and that changes the nature of what you think of those designs. But in a Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, where for the most part it's your party and you're not changing, those it becomes about the things that you're actually doing versus the actual encounter.
Yeah. I think best case scenario, and even that maybe is maybe is giving you too much credit, but I'm thinking something like in the S&T games
Yeah.
where hitting the enemy with the wrong thing has pretty dire consequences. You basically
Mm.
lose your entire turn. So I did notice in my time with something like SMT4, which at the time I loved. I haven't revisited it since, so I'm a little scared to see how I feel about it today. But I did notice, okay, they will mix it up in a way where, let's say, your each party member on your team has a set amount of skill slots. So let's say a very natural decision might be, okay, I'm gonna just slap this boy with multi-target skills, with
Right.
multi-target magic skills. That seems like the most efficient way to play the game. But then naturally you run into situations where, okay, I want to hit three guys with ice, but then uh if I do that, the Jack Frost will absorb the attack. The one Jack Frost, the sole Jack Frost in that group, and that will ruin my whole strategy, right? So I think when a game through its system rules has the ability to throw those wrenches in sometimes,
Mm.
um, that can be neat. And I think that is something I in the SMT series, I think I had the generic SMT experience where like I play Persona 4 Golden for the first time and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. What? Like you could do more turns when you hit the guy again, and like, oh, you have to pay attention to it. Like when I think about it now, it's not like the most complex gameplay ever, but at the time it felt pretty cool.
Right.
And I do think if I'm being completely honest, yeah, I'm probably overrating how actually varied that feels and
Mhm.
underrating how much it kind of repeats itself.
Right.
Still, even in that, what I call the best case scenario. And then I think with most other games, it's really hard to escape the idea that this whole loop of like, I really like the term avatar strength. That's something that I got
Hmm.
from the Eagle Raptor, I think
Okay.
Castlevania sequelitis, where okay, it's very self-explanatory, right? Your avatar gets relatively stronger somehow,
Right.
and um, when that's sort of coupled with infinitely repeatable encounters,
Right.
I think you end up with a structure that never quite makes sense, that never quite uh, congeals. Where okay, if I'm out of resources and I know there's no point continuing this dungeon or whatever, right? What is stopping me from just backtracking and healing and then trying again and like just investing more time, right? I think a lot of these balancing decisions, unfortunately, they always end up they always lead to, okay, you if you're not playing optimally, you just use a little more time, right? And
Right.
that's a style of design that I'm personally um that's very caustic to me.
Mm.
So just again, this is like fundamental idea of, okay, if you're bad at this game, quote unquote,
Yeah.
to put it like really
Yeah.
reductively, just spend more time, bro, and then you make it easier that way.
Yes.
It feels almost a little disrespectful of the player's time, right? The fact that you can use
Mm.
my real life, real world time as a resource to make the game easier. Um, that's something I've never been quite convinced by, and I think that's a contradiction you can't really solve.
Yes.
Either you're just okay with it or you're not.
I think my response to that is that I think it depends. So
Mm,
I noticed that I'm more open to it when it feels that it can be rare.
hmm
Like unless your game is designed right. So like let's for example, this is why I think about Dragon Quest One all the time. Like
hmm
finally playing that, I was like, oh, I see the idea here where it is all of the game is costing time, 100%. But the idea from get-go is that you're at the first town, it tells you nowhere to go, and the idea of being able to travel further because you've put in enough time, the accomplishment of getting to the next town feels like, whoa, I that sense compared to other RPGs, Dragon Quest One does a good job of making that journey between where you start and where you end up feel like I the game did not want me to get here, but I got here and I get to claim that as a success.
Yeah.
And I think when I go back to that game, I'm like, okay, that is not all time, right? Because they try to make sure that the enemies you face are in different directions are more versions of difficult to kind of push you in a particular way of exploration. But truthfully, for Dragon Quest One, you're not changing what you're doing a lot. It really is about encounters obfuscating your ability to explore.
hmm
I notice that when I go back to more modern RPGs, I want those things to be more separate.
Okay.
So I've been playing Final Fantasy VII Original, and folks will hear that on the second episode. But I notice that in those games, I tend to be like, I want to enjoy encounters or I want to enjoy exploration of the painterly locales. And that's when I get the this is repetitive because I split that into two different minds. I feel like some of the older RPGs are much more you earn exploration through the repetition versus I think modern games are not necessarily designed with you've earned your exploration. They feel like they often collide a little bit more directly, which is why I think Bravely Default was interesting because I think it's an acknowledgement of more modern RPGs, both in terms of games, but I think the taste of more modern RPG folks are like, I do want to do encounters, but I want to be able to choose when I want to be present in that and choose when I want to be present in the world.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to that question of because those things are obfuscated often in RPGs versus other games where like the enemies are directly in the world, it becomes uh a weird balance and challenge.
Yeah. One thing that struck me about Dragon Quest One at the time when I played it, which was probably like 10 years ago at this point, damn. And is that the way it staggers out its gold and the way it um presents everything is a little hands off.
Yes.
It I have this vague sense of, okay, I probably want to go to this forest, and then a good way to do that would be to get the sword from the blacksmith, and then a good way to do that would be to like kill some slimes for a while. And something about that, I'm gonna very loosely call it decision process. It's not really a decision, right? But like there's at least sort of a mental map of, okay, this is my step-by-step plan, even though there's not that many things to choose from, right? But like it's still it feels like something.
Yes.
And that, I think for me at the time, it was enough of a hook. Um, I think I would be a little more critical of that. If I went back to it now, I would
Right.
probably be more. attuned to the idea, okay, this gameplay is like not is like pretty surface level and not very rich. The actual like core interactions that I'm doing,
Right.
which is again, I'm really concerned with that. I was actually talking to a friend today, who's a game developer, and um he's working on a sort of tactics stealth game. And we were really talking about this difference about, okay, he's like really interested in sort of long-term careful planning, and I'm really about sort of momentary. I
In the
care about,
moment.
yeah, yeah. And I want the moment-to-moment stuff to be really rich and complicated. Um, and I don't care so much about what happens in like 5 minutes. Like,
I guess that's a good segue to what
mm,
I think most RPGs choose then to try to address your concern is that to allow more in the moment decision making is to allow more reaction timing based elements, right? Uh,
mm-hmm,
I haven't played Expedition 33, but I have a friend of mine, shout out to Colton again, who talks about that the planning phase that I often highlight, and we'll talk about more of what I think the planning is the game. He's like, yes, that's in Expedition 33, that's there and it's embedded, but because I'm able to aim for a weak point and then I have to do parrying and there's a perfect dodge and those other more character action demands, I am always engaged. That's the response. And I
mm-hmm,
could even sense like scaling it all the way down. I beat Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga earlier this year. I love the experience, the nuanced ways that they tried to evolve enemy encounters where regular enemies would have slightly new movements and like because RPGs tend to this is enemy their enemy this is your enemy in blue right it's just the same encounter. I think Mario and Luigi was interesting because it'd be like yes it's the same encounter but how you dodge what they can do that's slightly different and so you have to now pay attention and then through the attrition of you trying to go through things quickly you can't be too lazy, right? And
mm-hmm,
I do you find that approach to this RPG stuff satisfying? Does that give you the in-moment things you're looking for? And maybe is there an RPG where you think of that takes advantage of that timing component to be impactful? Because I could see you, if I were to predict your response, using more the Mario and Luigi space, you would suggest that the response part it might be active, but the action part is less active. That's where if I were to guess your response, but go for it.
mm-hmm. Um, I have to disappoint you. I have very little experience with those games, ironically enough.
Okay, okay, okay,
So with those, I finished my Mother 3, which
okay.
has this
Yeah,
sort
that's
of combo system. I think that's the most similar probably thing. But um, I think I mean one common take that I heard with Expedition 33 is that it actually the way it's balanced leads it to basically yeah you kind of have to parry and
yeah,
dodge and all that stuff if you want to play well.
yes,
So. Um, I think what I like is when you have a set of fundamental kind of systems and rules, and then the designer can sort of rearrange them and reconfigure them slightly, and that creates a weird, complicated new situation. And I think if it's something that's kind of linear in how it scales with, okay, you would just hit this button. I again, sorry, I don't have really context for how
yeah,
that develops in like
yeah.
something like Mario and Luigi, but I'm a little more skeptical about that. I think a um good example might be something like Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter,
Okay,
where to go back to the dichotomy of bespoke versus
disposable.
disposable encounters, that game, it is a I think that game shows this is not like purely a turn-based versus real-time thing
Yes,
either. It's a turn-based game, but the enemies all occupy sort of the exploratory field. And then once you come into contact with them, then the battle begins. And the battle is in a separate instance, but
right,
it's still in the same environment. And
right.
then every enemy in that specific radius is incorporated into the fight. And that's like, okay, wow, they could actually very intentionally, okay, we put this enemy there and then this enemy there, and then
Mhm.
you can have sort of interesting new dynamics and interactions. Now, I will say, as they have a really strong base with that game. This is a really good launching off point. However, it still kind of gets really repetitive after a while. And I think it tells you, okay, um there just needs to be more um I guess see it's really hard to break this down. It's been a little bit since I played it
Yeah,
as well.
no, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, it's another game I'm thinking of is Into the Breach.
Ooh, that's what.
Just yeah.
Okay, I could see. Yeah,
Yeah.
what are you thinking with their design encounters?
I like that game a lot. Now, I haven't really finished it. I never got super far in it, but it's pretty ingenious in, in just how it feels like effortlessly it creates new situations.
Yes.
And I think again, it has a really rich set of rules to kind of draw from, and that's the key. And I think with something like Breath of Fire, there's just too many little mechanics that um like
Oh,
undermine
right.
some of the dynamics. Like
Ah,
I think there was like a timing mini game, for example, where you just
yeah.
combo guys over and over again. It's like it feels like the game inevitably steers much more toward those types of dynamics than, oh, I really have to think about the position and like
Th-
that sort of thing.
This is interesting because I almost want to ask, is that because it's it is the idea for RPGs, because I'm thinking about something like Seven, but not just FF7, where part of RPGs is trying to give you the kitchen sink to break
Hmm.
something, right? Like the idea is we are going to try to give you a lot, even though like these might even be simple systems, but it's like by the nature of the choice being so wide, you and the ability for you like, well, I want to play in this way, almost contradicts more bespoke design. Because I'm thinking about like
Hmm.
right now where I'm like, if I pl like, I would say in a typical RPG, the bespoke designs are the boss battles, right? Like that's truly when I think of a dungeon, I'm like, you have a bunch of disposable encounters, and then you may have a mid boss, or you may have certain special enemies, but the boss is the bespoke encounter. And only the idea is that for RPGs to give you the options that you can cheat the boss if you really wanted to, if that led to your playstyle, right? I got a hard wall in Final Fantasy VII. Folks who know the underground submarine base in Junon, there's a boss that basically all the strategies I had used up to that point were not really viable
Mm.
because of how much damage it was outputting. And I was like, everything else I could kind of strategize, finagle around, and I would lose in other battles. But I was like, okay, I can if I really played in my materia, if I really played with my setup, I could get around. This was such a hard wall for me that I just accepted that I had to grind and I had to recontextualize everything. But I was like, let me see how do other people solve this encounter. And I was like, beyond just me being underleveled, what do they do to solve? And I was like, oh, if I were to have, in this case, the enemy skill material, which allows you to learn different attacks from different enemies that they use on you, I'd
Mm.
not be using mine a lot. But if I'd used mine more, I would have things to really break open the game in
Yeah.
ways that I had barely had access to. And I think it there there's a desire that is like, yo, if you really wanted to break the game, if I wanted to go out of my way to break the game open, that's cool and it's exciting. But I also think it leads to, well, if the game can allow you to do that, can you really bespoke design? Because then you're in a position like me where without those resources, I have to think of something else, and you need to accommodate someone like me who hasn't gone out their way to break. And I think that creates a tension for different versus something like more Into the Breach, which is that you only have these certain actions, and that's all you got. You got to
Yeah.
make it count.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think there is a desire with RPGs to make you interact with the rules in this very literal way. Because like my friend Pang, he has this idea of aesthetic obfuscation where okay, if you think about a game like Doom or something, right? Like we are seeing the enemies, we're seeing the visuals, we're seeing the visual representations of things.
Yeah.
You could imagine a version of the game that's just numbers on your screen, right? It's just
Yes.
literally the Matrix, right? Um, and obviously the aesthetics kind of inform your understanding of how things work. And I think in an RPG, um, they're very not, ironically, very not aesthetic, right? I mean, this
Yeah.
podcast is called Menu Combat.
Yes.
So it's, I think there's something really interesting that happens when you have a SMT game, for example, and you say, huh, I understand what's happening. I'm gonna make my entire party block fire. This boss can't touch me anymore. And then suddenly they will do the Almighty spell instead. And that's like insane. And they will never do the spell unless you do this specific thing, right?
Right.
And that's something that's like logically speaking is insanely stupid, but like it's a system
Yes.
interaction, right? That is like that makes sense because of how they condition you to like interact with the game, I think. And like I think as a sort of intellectual, I like sort of appreciate that. I'm
Yes.
like, okay, this is kind of cool. As a player, I'm like, I don't think this makes the game that much more interesting.
No?
Um, like for what I value surfing games,
Yeah.
like I'm like, okay, this is stupid. Like I don't that the game could just like break its own rules in that way. That's something that I have a personal peeve with, right? But see the sort of again compelling like Lego nature of it, how
Ooh,
things kind of slot together, right?
that is such a good language because I've been trying to figure out there. I'm not so ironically menu combat. My brain is always of two thoughts. I enjoy being in a menu and like, all right, let me reconfigure what I have, and then other times I'm just like, I don't feel like I have enough things that are actually going to be useful here. Why are you putting me in a menu, right? Like those are usually the two different contrasting things. But I think that Lego appeal helps me get at what I think folks like myself are often trying to communicate. I know
Yeah.
I think about a conversation GK had, and it was like, and I think you said it earlier, either today on or off the podcast. I don't remember when we said where you're like, turn-based makes you think more tactical, and it's like, yes, but that's not what what we're actually trying to say. Because I feel like it often reduces the fact that action games are not tactical. I'm like, no, that's not what like both of these things are tactical if well designed, right? Like
Yeah.
it's that the appeal of what you're being drawn to are different. So when I play an action game, I know that because I have bad reaction timing, I tend to be more reactive. Like when I play a fighting game, you don't want to see me play a fighting game. It's all reaction. Like I know it's supposed to be turn taking, but all I do, or if you even see me play something like Alien Soldier, it is not a pretty sight. And so what's hard for me sometimes when I play certain action games is that what I know is a tactical experience. A game is trying to communicate something.
Mm,
I need to engage in the dance. But if I'm not able to keep up, it becomes about reflexes.
yeah.
And that becomes, especially in the modern era where most people are, I want a game with a parry. I want, like, they fall into these rules of, like, this is what action games should look like. It becomes so much about designing for reaction that a lot of the appeal that I think folks from your camp don't come to the forefront. And so it becomes like, hey, of course I'm going to say that this feels more tactical over here because that's the fundamental, like, you don't have anything else to rely on. It really is
Yeah.
just like if I can't be tactical, even though we can say that some of the Final Fantasy encounters are brainless, some of it is requires some kind of like you have to fudge around in the menus. That's I think is what is like what is the core appeal. And I feel like in action games, unless you get to a high enough skill set, like the conversations I hear folks say about Bayonetta 2, right? Like using this game as an example. Everybody who I know who are not like action game brain are like this is extremely well designed. This is really but everybody who I know is action brain activated is like, well, I mean, it's cool, but the design, like, I hear the language break, and I think about that
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
about do you feel like in other encounters with games, do people? part of the reason why when you hear tactical for turn-based, part of it is that they're unable to engage in the game in a dance that I think a lot of you are, and maybe just action games aren't the action games that folks are engaging with don't allow them to engage in that dance as well.
Mm. Hmm. That's a yeah, that's a big one. I don't wanna turn this into action combat, the podcast.
It's
Um,
fine. I think this gets to the spirit because I think we could segue into
yeah,
Tales a little bit because I think that as I know East fans will be upset as the fathers of this action RPG element that they've kind of
yeah,
taken from East. I think having some action game design will help lead to that kind of segue.
yeah. I was telling you in the pre-show that what did I tell you in the pre-show? God damn it. It was action game related.
I'm trying to.
It uh
You were
God
saying
damn it.
something about Final Fight 1 encounter design.
Thank you. That was it. So it is the godfather of beat 'em ups. It is the one that everybody thinks of when they think about beat 'em ups. And therefore it is very easy to think of it as the stupidest and simplest one. And I think you have to look at it with very a specific set of eyes
Yes.
to like really to really apologies, I was not familiar with your game, right? Like to really have that reaction to it. Like when I this sounds so like I'm on my own. Fill in the rest of that sentence. I don't know if I can swear. Um, so but like when I play it, I'm like, okay, I'm engaging with this enemy and I'm seeing, oh, the other enemies are circling around me and they're trying to, they're trying to do a flank basically. And that's like, whoa, that's kind of crazy to see in an arcade game, right? Whereas I think if you don't really have the inclination to appreciate that sort of thing, it will not occur to you as something that's like impressive or interesting
Mm.
about the game. It will just be, okay, this guy hit me, whatever. I just turn around and blah, right? And then as soon as you die in that game, you're like, oh, well, it's not stupid arcade games. I just throw in another coin and right. It doesn't occur to you as like good design that the game is creating all these like dynamics by just putting enemies in different spots. And I guess, um if we then extrapolate that to like RPGs or like menu RPGs, because I'm in a menu, maybe I'm in a more sort of reflective state of mind. Um, but then I'm sort of taking for granted the fact that like, okay, again, in an action game, there's so much more they can leverage, right?
Right.
If um again, even something like, I mean, I'm playing Metaphor right now, and
Right.
I'm enjoying the game, but Um, it's something that seems so complex on the surface when you're in a fight situation, when you're faced with four guys and you have four guys and they all have different skills. It seems so complex, but really like um sometimes you just hit Jack Frost with fire, Like
Sometimes the simplest choice is just what you're going to do. Yes.
yeah, yeah, I find that really interesting.
Do you think we sh this is one question, and then we'll segue into thinking about Tails, because I think one of the other appeals of I think folks who can stomach some more repetitive encounters is this idea of progression and how does a game communicate
Hmm.
progression. But in your mind, right? I haven't played the E series, but a lot of folks talk about the E series, specifically like the top-down ones, as like 10-hour, no frills, don't.
There be some frills. I'm sorry, y'all. Ease one. I mean, okay, if you think ES1 is like, it was so tight, it's so tight. May I introduce you to I don't know, Sega Rally. That's a 5 minute game. That's a 5 minute playthrough. That's tight. Games are too long, guys. Games are too friggin' long.
Oh, that is hilarious. Because this is, I will tell you, the selling of East, specifically Origin, as this brisk, like 7 hour experience, 14 if you do both, and it's like they describe it as this pure action experience.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, in those East games, as I say, I haven't played it, like, are all the design, all the encounters that bespoke? And I'm wondering, in your world, would you argue that for a meaningful RPG would be a structured game with every encounter being intentionally bespoke? And that's
Yeah.
where I'm wondering, like, would you describe it as your platonic ideal of an RPG, 7 hours of bespoke actions?
It's what's really important is whether the game can really leverage it. One game that I thought of a lot was Chrono Trigger, because
Hmm.
Chrono Trigger is effectively bespoke encounters if you really think
Yes,
about it.
yep, yep. This
Because they
is
put different enemies on every screen, and it's like it's unique configurations, but does it really matter? Because of how how the mechanics are designed, how the enemies are designed. I was clicking attack through the whole game and then just potioning up after, and like that's it. And um, I think bespoke encounters as a again like I think 5 hours is a great length, right? I think that's a great length for a game. 5 hours can still be too long. Uh, but that to me, yes, that is my platonic ideal for any game. Again, I describe myself as the Sephiroth of RPGs.
yeah.
I'm just so allergic when I see a game with this disposable encounter style of design. Um, and I'm at the point in my life where I'm instantly very allergic to it.
Mm.
And I mean, we'll get to Bravely Default in a minute, but that's one where I think intellectually I have some issues with the encounter rates turn off, turn on
Yes, that
dynamic.
is where I'm excited. In fact, let's pivot there before we do the tail stuff.
Yeah.
Part of
I
part of what I've assumed, so I love Bravely Default, one of my favorite games. I think two things are true about that game. It is a capitulation to everyone who wants these things to be disparate. And I can't decide, is that capitulation good or bad? And I think the interesting thing is, and most RPG fans won't admit that this is true, it's a reason why that has started showing up in the remasters of these old games. It's not a coincidence that Bravely Default gets received well at first. It's kind of aged for a lot of people, but that mechanic of on and off encounters is so, the fact that I can do that in FF7, the fact that I can do that in any FF now, like FF5, is some kind of admittance about the idea of encounters.
yeah.
I'm more generous to it, but I will say that I can imagine from your perspective, it's like, if you have to design it in this way, what does that say about your genre?
Yeah. I think capitulation, admittance, that is a great word for it. Because intellectually, I do feel like I was right. I was right, you know. Y'all actually agree with me. And on that level, I mean, if I were to be a little mean, I would say I don't really respect it, right? I'm a little like, okay, like you just didn't want to design the game. Um, as a player, again, when we go back to the idea of, okay, I could just use more time to
Yes.
like, again, this idea of I go deep into this dungeon and it's sort of this grueling resource drain bit by bit. I think that is sort of the theoretical
Yes.
yardstick for RPGs. Like that's sort of what they're trying. Well, maybe not, depending on your preference, but
I would say that that's the ideal up until at least the 360 generation, and I think some
mm,
conversations happened there. But yes, I would
yeah,
agree.
oh yeah. That is sort of what a lot of games I think are trying to reach. And then when you think about, okay, are they actually reaching it? I'd say in so many cases, no, right? In so many
Right.
cases, practically speaking, I'm in there with 99 potions and zero problems, you know? Um, or Like, I mean, Etrian Odyssey. I've only played Etrian Odyssey 1
Mhm.
DS version, very busted game, but I loved it at the time.
I was going
And
to ask if the dungeon crawler, because it's unabashedly that, it gets
yeah,
at that design much more clearly.
yeah. It's that's the thing. Like somehow, I mean, when I think about it now, the idea that oh, as soon as my resources are drained, I bounce out of the dungeon, restock, do it again, and I don't know why at the time that didn't occur to me as like not good design. Because like I feel like there's no real gameplay loop there, right? There's no real.
I think there is, but that goes to sense of progression, right? Go
Okay,
for it.
see
Go
that,
for it.
yeah, I guess where I'm going with this
Mhm.
is that I don't in my current sort of state
Yeah.
in my game preferences, I don't really rate progression as a concept. I don't really
That
value it.
that I
Um
think is one of the most interesting backdrops I think in all, both in terms of I think for this podcast and what we're talking about, but I think progression can be insidious. And I'm saying
yeah,
that as an RPG guy. Like I think it can be insidious.
that's good to admit.
I I'm thinking about it when I play other games that are not selling themselves as RPGs, where they use progression as their selling point.
Hmm.
I feel very weird. I I literally have this right here. I like Horizon. I think it's a pretty solid game. The RPG mechanics are the most baffling construction of this game,
Mm.
where I'm like, it feels like it's only designed to mitigate any sense of like that feels it's the most like this is designed for time because the core encounters of this game are actually I'd argue really thoughtful. Like I have
Mm.
to get used to them, but I'm like the planning of traps, if you actually study the enemy, like I think they actually design a core mechanic and system and they ask themselves a question of what should this live in, and then they're stuck with the question of, well, what do people appreciate, and then it
Hmm.
goes from, well, there needs to be an open world. While I'd argue Horizon's probably one of the only games I'm like, probably best designed for open worlds given how the creatures are designed. I'm like, okay, not don't think it's the best choice, but I understand the choice. And then how do open world games have to lead to progression is where I'm like, I have a lot of feelings where I'm like, there's another world where this mechanics is designed for something else. I think with more explicit RPGs, I feel a little bit differently, and I think it's because, and I'm starting to pay attention to this more. The sense of returning to a place and feeling different in that place is probably one of the strongest feelings I think RPGs can only really get with time.
Hmm. Hmm.
You can't get it with anything else, right? Like I
Yeah.
for example, when I now say, for example, going back to Dragon Quest One, when I go back to the original town after I beat the Green Dragon, I feel like I go back and beat those slimes. I'm just like, you can't touch me. I've now. It is a very triumphant thing, and I notice it when one of the gimmicks of RPGs is very much of you travel all these places on foot, right? Like they send you through the world, you chart out the map, and then they'll throw you a boat, they throw you a plane, and then now you have to kind of piece together the next part of the story. But you start going back to old places, and I'm like, oh yeah, this doesn't bother me anymore. I've come such a
Hmm.
far way, and that's is such a strong appeal. Even I think Chrono Trigger is probably the shortest game, and I think gets at that idea because you can get that through being able to go back in time to places that you've already traveled. Like, because what Chrono Trigger is about 25 hours ish.
Yeah.
I think that's the only short, like Dragon Quest One, Chrono Trigger are the shortest games that I think accomplish that sense of now that I'm back, my relationship with this world is different, and that
Hmm.
feels affirming. Where I feel like other games, no diss to Horizon, cannot communicate that through its RPG mechanics. Where I feel like a lot of other games, when they lean into RPG mechanics, are able to gesture at that. But I feel like from your perspective, that sense of progression is not real to you almost.
Yeah, I think our little disagreement about Etrian Odyssey earlier is
Yeah,
really telling because I called it not a gameplay loop because I really took for granted my preference and my perspective on it. Which yeah, by my preference, that makes sense. But then I'm ignoring
yeah,
how anybody else might read it,
yeah, yeah,
and I think that's really instructive in how these conversations kind of should go. I think everybody should like be really upfront about okay, this is why I value this or this is why I don't
yeah.
value this. Because I do feel like again, I don't want to be like condescending or whatever, but like
Mm,
I do feel like I have a lot of conversations with RPG heads who are a little evasive about how they feel about that because like I think somewhere they recognize um what kind of you were talking about
yeah,
with the potential insidiousness of progression and then also um just I guess the inherent fact that it's not the same as like developing a skill for example
yeah.
in real life, right? um I think that's I th I don't want to assume too much, right? But I
No,
feel
definitely.
like in conversations that I've had, that's something that some people may feel like a little insecure about, and that's why they're never quite clear. Okay, do I like this or do I not like it? And
Mm.
then and then sometimes, I mean, I have friends who are like they they sort of embrace uh the sort of the monkey brain aesthetic, like haha, I like when the number goes up, sort of, and it feels like almost like a sort of mechanism of deflection, even, right? To
Right,
like, okay, if I say that it's silly, that I can like it without shame, right?
right.
It's really interesting, and like I feel like I sound like such an asshole because like I'm like, I like smart games where you learn things. Like, I'm sorry, right? But like, it's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes, and like, I mean, I can think of a time in my life where I had those same feelings, right, about games
Yeah,
where that was effective for me. For me, it just isn't anymore, and that's fine.
yeah.
That's
Of
totally
course.
okay. I guess where I land is that I'm more convinced by games that elicit those feelings in like other ways.
This
Um,
is this is why I
yeah.
wanted to ask you, right? So I remember asking you a few weeks ago on your stream about like what's your tips for Devil May Cry, and I think you pointed me in a Matthew Matos's video, which I have to do. My character action history, right, only really is some of the Streets of Rage beat 'em ups, if you want to consider that a part of your lineage,
Mhm.
a little bit of Gunstar Heroes, and Beautiful Joe 2. Like that's the framework that I think is most adjacent to a lot of folks from your taste.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think about a lot, which is these are because Beautiful Joe 2 is what about 10 hours? Not crazy. These are short, brisk experiences, and I've been trying to think about when I hear you all speak, the language of progression is very different, and it's about
Yeah.
skill. And I've been trying to figure out. So I can't beat Beautiful Joe 2. I'm literally on the final boss. I don't know if you know where you have to do unlock all these keys by jumping into the bottom platforms, and then you have the boss rush at the end. That's where I'm at. I've never been able to beat it since childhood.
I actually never beat the sequel either. Because I mean, the sequel is like one of those games I think I'm pretentious about because, like, Kamiya didn't direct it, so why would I care? But I've played the first one a lot, so yeah.
I've planned to buy the first one to actually see what some of the differences are. What I've been trying to think about is that the language in which you all describe about improving your skill, I want to hear more about that because that's the sense of satisfaction that seems to come across. And I've been trying, I think RPGs can get at that, but I think they don't get at it as thoughtfully as more curated experiences. And I want to hear more about that and what that means for like some of the things that you look for going to more even action RPGs. Because I could sit down and talk about tales and the design, but
Mhm.
I want to get a better sense of like what is the progression that you notice in your play? How do you develop that reading of it? Because I think for someone like me who's gonna go play it, it'll take a while for me to understand what I'm reading. What is like I could see the words of a text, right? It's a different to understand the passage. And I think you guys
Mhm.
understand the passage. And I think other folks, and I particularly would say RPG fans don't read that passage at all. I at least know the passage exists.
Yeah. The two games I had to immediately think of just now were Rain World
Mhm.
and Breath of the Wild. And I think they're very relatable examples because okay, they have this sort of um adventure-y spirit. They're these big connected worlds where it is likely that I will return to older locations, and then the so Breath of the Wild, for example, does have a form of avatar strength, right? It has you level up your hearts, you level up stamina, you get armor. I think the weapon system is so clever. Sorry, I'm a weapons
I am
breaking.
100% with you. I think
Yeah,
people are boring when they want that to go away. I think it's a
yeah,
clever thing.
yeah. Like the fact that the whole world is open to me and I can get a big ass sword, but then I only have it for so long. That to me that's genius.
Yes.
Um, the phenomenon that I really find with a game like Breath of the Wild is that I have that sense of wow, I really mastered this world. And the crazy thing is that the same sense persists across playthroughs. If I start a new game now, like when I was playing it the first time, it felt like I had the sense primarily because of the avatar strength. But then when I started the new game, I realized, oh, that's not actually true, right? I'm moving through this world in a much more nimble, kind of
Mm.
intentional way, and I know how to sort of sidestep enemies, how to be a little tricky, and I'm
So
more,
those
yeah,
secondary skills that you pick up are still there without the avatar strength, and that changes.
exactly. I I think I mean it's such a popular game, right? I think a lot of people can relate to this where the first I mean one of the first things I tried is like, okay, I want to go straight to the castle, right?
Yes.
And I run across Hyrule Field, I get a horse, I think I'm cooking, but um uh I just get owned so quickly by the Guardians and it's so intimidating. Um and that's a feeling that stays with you the whole game, the entirety of your first playthrough. Um, and then now that I'm playing it, I'm realizing actually it's not. It's like something you can deal with if you're clever about it. I'm much more confident in how I approach those situations. Um, I know, oh, I can parry the laser, right? And
Yeah.
if I feel confident in that's a really powerful tool. Um, I think Rain World, that's a game that not as many people have played, but I think had a big resurgence recently. I think a lot of people kind of now know about it, and I think that one has a very similar sensation. It doesn't really have any forms of avatar strength at all. It doesn't have any progression really. It has like slight of Metroidvania gating, but that's it. Um, I I think that game makes it really explicit how this process of learning and understanding can work because when you pick it up, the you're really struck by the just the weight and the unwieldiness of your character. The game has it has like a pretty robust physics simulation. It has um all the character animation is procedural as well. So it's not really hard-baked
Mm.
states. It's characters can move like in really fluid ways and that not just extends to enemies but also your own character. And you I think if you first pick it up, it's really hard to shake the sense of like, wow, this guy is really floppy. This is a very floppy feeling game. And seeing that slowly transition into confidence and like I guess assurance, right? I know how to move through this world nimbly now.
Mm.
This the sense of the floppiness is like literally still there, but your body has kind of like internalized it and you don't really think
Right.
about it anymore that way. And um I again it's worth looking up, just look at screenshots, right? But you're this tiny tiny creature and you have these giant vulture creatures that seem so intimidating that you can't even imagine how to deal with. You will be able to deal with them
Mm.
if you're attentive and if you are receptive to what the game is kind of trying to convey to you.
That makes sense. Okay. I know very little, and so I have to take a look at that. And I think my other question is when you play, right, you've highlighted two games that I think are good at communicating the kind of growth that you're having and
Yeah.
through that sense of movement in the world and how you read the world. how would you talk about that for, I guess this is where I'll bring in Tails, right? I think about Tails combat as specifically Vesperia. Because Berseria, I like the game. You're literally doing the same functions beginning to end. Like
Hmm.
it's one of those games where like if they had cribbed a different Tales games for its combat, I would talk about that game in a very different light. Vesperia is interesting because the first 5 hours feel like the worst game you've ever played. In terms of character movement, its stiffness, how characters can get you in a what is the word where you're stunned for a long time and they can
Hit
change stuff,
stun.
and it gets very frustrating when you feel like, oh, it's just a 3 hit combo.
Oh yeah.
And then they apply their RPG progression system to allow you to execute different combat actions, right? Like, and so it's not just the, oh, I've leveled up and learned fire, I've leveled up and learned that. It's, oh, I can now chain a combo to this kind of art. And then I can change a combo to an art to a different kind of art. And then I can change I can extend that core combo to an art to an, and then oh, I can attach this thing that allows me to dodge in a different way. And I've
Hmm.
been trying to think. So I think I've grown to love that system and it's why I'm like I will always talk about game without glowing light. But I always wonder, I'm like, okay, they did that and I don't do the side quests all the time. So I'm like, that's 65 hours to convey that sense of growth. How could they have conveyed that in a shorter time where I'm not thinking that this is the worst feeling game for 3 hours, 4 hours?
Oh yeah.
And I don't I've been trying to wrestle with that because I think that was so satisfying. And that's why sometimes I'm like, I think RPG length should be shorter, but sometimes I'm like, how do you convey that sense of growth because it's not just avatar strength, it's the combo of your avatar evolving, and that's by choices you make. Because I'm like, you cannot equip any of these stats to your character, which I can't imagine playing that game and never changing it, but I know people must have done that, and they have to be prepared for that. And then I wasn't even as adventurous because I'm only talking about it for the main character, right? Like if people use Judy or people use such and such characters, the scale of what those growth patterns look like, yes, they are number go up, but it's like no execution changes.
So, to clarify a little bit, so when you get new arts, for example, it's been a long time since I
Yeah,
played
no,
it.
you're good. Yeah,
It's for you, it's the sense that it recontextualizes your existing moveset, right? It's
that's basically how I read. So like you can learn new arts, and that changes your moveset, and then you can from your armor, if you, I think you have to play like, over time, right? You gain XP from your armor. You can then equip that to change what you can do.
okay.
So that's different from just the art.
Okay. Wait, how exactly does that work? How does the armor interact with sort of your moveset?
So if I go to, let's say I go to one town and there's a bunch of armor I can buy.
Hmm.
Armor sometimes will be like, oh, you get to have this damage number go up. But there's armor that says, hey, if you equip this armor, it allows you to, as opposed to do a 3 chain combo, you can do a 4 chain combo.
Oh, okay.
And then obviously you have to equip it for some enough time for you to permanently learn that skill.
Okay.
And so, and then you have a limited amount of equipment skills that you can equip at any point in time. So you have to choose, do I want this art? Do I want this damage increase? Or do I want to increase the level of combos I can execute? Like that kind of choice making. And that might be overselling it a little bit, but that's the general just going town to town as opposed to just something like Final Fantasy 9 where you go to a new town, you get a new thing, and then you're just equipping whatever it allows you to learn,
Yeah.
limiting what you can learn, and the fact that it affects execution and not just the properties. I've always found that fascinating.
Yeah. I think what I'm getting from this the most is that the game is going to some lengths to stagger its overall system. It tries to stagger the information by like literally staggering what you have available at a time. And I guess like once you get a thing, it interacts with the things that already exist.
Right.
It's not, oh, I have a fire spell and like it's a fire spell, right? It's there's a little more to it. I think I I mean that's like pretty they are real-time games. They have
Mhm.
a lot of sort of fighting game DNA even you
Yeah.
could say. And that is something that a phenomenon you can also perceive in action games. And I think it is a challenge for action games as well, just generally the idea that um obviously I sort of stay away from developer intent as like a concept.
Hmm.
I don't really talk about it. I'm very death of the author minded personally.
Okay.
And so explicitly speaking, I don't really know like what exactly is the purpose of the shop in something like Devil May Cry. That doesn't really matter to me, right? I can imagine, okay, it could be for the sense of progression, for the sense of, oh, my character gets stronger. It could also just be we want to stagger out the mechanics so you're not overwhelmed, right?
Mhm.
And um and I think you can, again, with a game like Devil May Cry, you can
Yeah.
imagine a very similar kind of process of, oh, um, let's say I know I can launch an enemy, I can juggle them in the air, and it feels cool. And then later I get the vortex move where I sort of shoot forward, as like this flying
Right.
Devil Trigger Dante, whatever DMC bullshit. Um, then sort of what you were talking about, I think you have this synapse in your brain that says, "Oh, I can launch the enemy first and then do the vortex, and then created new possibilities, right?"
Right.
And I think you have the question of, okay, would this sensation be as powerful had I not had to unlock the vortex first, right? That's a good question. I think where I'm at with games is that I do personally I value the discovery process more highly than the I guess the sense of anticipation or the sense of
Hmm.
reward, right?
Yeah.
I find it inherently rewarding to discover things, right?
Yes.
Um One game I had to think of was Symphony of the Night, which has a really strange system where Alucard has all these spells that you can use, and they're available from the start of the game, but the way you use them, the inputs that you um have to access to like to access spells, they're obscured. The game doesn't tell you about it.
Oh.
Um, so I mean, you could just look that stuff up
Right.
online and then whatever.
Did did you look it up or did you give it
My
the
first time, no. I think I had the NPC Symphony of the Night experience. That's like, okay, I just play the game and then whoa, Alucard does a weird thing. I don't know what the fuck just happened. Um, and then as soon as you've done it for the first time, then the game tells you, okay, this is how you do it.
Oh.
Uh, and I was playing the game organically that way, and I thought it was kind of cool. I thought because like you kind of have it both ways that way, right? You kind of, okay, if you're an asshole like me, you can just look it up and then, which at the time I didn't. Now I probably would, right? Um, because I value sort of, okay, I want to play with these maneuvers. I want to see the whole possibility space. I want to see what you can do with the mechanics. That's what I value the most highly. So I could just look it up and get it over with. But everybody else, they could still have that sense of like
Right.
reward and surprise and discovery over time, which if time is like an important component of
Right.
that, yeah.
No. So you get at because that's an additional piece that we don't not that we don't talk about. I think in RPG world, the idea of discovery in our how do I put it? One of the challenges I've been putting to myself over the last year, which is to trust the discovery process of the game in front of me,
Hmm.
which means that I, because I'm still bad at games, I've always had to look up things. You do not want to see how I played Metroid Prime in 2007. It is not a, it is probably one of the worst gameplay experiences ever. And I've had to look online to be like, what is happening here? But I've been trying to embrace the level of discovery embedded in these RPGs, because that's something I think for folks of my age, when they talk about these games, it's a sense of not knowing being a very inherently appealing thing. And so even though that's
Mm,
often a time consuming experience, right? Like there's one thing in FF7 I did recently where I'm like, if I did not know in advance, I can't imagine how many hours I would have wasted trying to figure out how to progress. And I
yeah,
and I go back and forth between would it have been more useful just for it to be a discovery, or is it useful for me to know it? And I think for an era of RPG fan, the illusion of discovery is so appealing, and I think that
yeah.
but in our world it costs time more than anything else. Although I would say in your world it costs time, but I guess it's a different resource of time. Because I'm like, how do you find out some of the things you can do without being able to piece it together in I guess that's maybe my other question to you. What helps aid discovery in the I guess the Devil May Cries of the world, or like what helps you put those synapses together and discover? Because there's a sense the word you all tend to use is creativity, and so I
Mm.
want to. How does the game design help you foster that for yourself?
That's a big one. Yeah, the first thing that I thought of dodges the question a little bit,
Yeah.
but I think I think these types of games are very they lend themselves to sharing very easily
Ooh, okay, okay.
because like I mean obviously there's the whole legacy of combo videos, right?
Yeah,
That's a whole can of worms. When I see somebody do a cool thing and actually I was talking about launch Vortex.
yeah,
Um I think I distinctly remember, oh, I saw someone you do that in a combo video. I was like, oh. And then I want to say when I saw it, I thought it was cool, and then I did it, it felt just as rewarding as you know, had the game told me about it, or had I maybe even discovered it organically, right? Um, I think that is a cool experience. It's I think that's something another friend of mine has kind of talked about as a bit of an anxiety in trying to critique games, where if you want to analyze something sort of holistically, and if you want to be informative and instructive about it, um, when do you actually know that you know? When do you know that you know enough to
yeah.
speak on it? You never know.
Yes.
It's I think I mean sort of okay as a game design student, that is something I've thought about also from an academic perspective. I'm I am kind of a believer that some level of meta-analysis is very useful with games. Recently, a lot of my academic work, I've been very interested in just depth as a concept in games, mechanical depth. And in that context, it's sort of inevitable to consider, okay, what do players kind of gravitate toward? What strategies do they use? What seems to be a strong strategy? What seems to be a strategy that invalidates another strategy, right? What does that tell us about depth? You can't really make those claims without meta-analysis, right?
Right.
You you don't discover the true like I mean the game is a black box. You can't for a lot of especially modern games, you can't really look inside them and understand how they work. Even the people who made them
Right.
don't fully understand how they work, right? Um So I was saying, okay, my first initial answer about sharing was like kind of a sidestep, but really it's not if you think about it because it is the only way that you really discover anything. You need as many people on the problem as possible and like try to decipher it.
Yes.
And I enjoy that a lot. I think I get a much richer experience out of games by being able to um treat them as this problem for a lot of people
Mhm.
to solve and to share information with. And I think I mean there's also sort of the ego slash narcissistic angle of it that like okay, if I see somebody do a cool thing, I'm mad that I can't do it. So I want to do it
Yes.
too. I maybe you followed my sort of journey with Crazy Taxi a little bit. That's a big game that fostered that for me, and it's really it's really quite insane because it's really a couple people holding that down. It's really a couple people sort of getting information and making spreadsheets and grinding it.
Mm.
Um, and it's like, what would we even do without people like actually trying to
That's
figure out the game?
the reason why I find this so interesting because I would argue, as I said, thinking about for a set of fans who are not me, right? That level of discoverability, community sharing, I think is very RPG centric in the sense of
Hmm.
hidden characters. I mean, we don't get that anymore, but we used to. Hidden
Bro, Mewtwo's under the truck.
Bro, Mewtwo's under the truck. The answering of like, how do you get the ultimate weapon? The
Yeah.
oh, you didn't get this special summon. Like, I because my time is so short, I unless the side content is blinding me, I tend to be like, I'm not going to do it just for the sake of I'm already putting 60 hours. If the game is well designed, I should be able to get through if the resources the game has given me. But
Mm.
I know for many folks, when they play, for example, Tales, the old Tales, it's like you missed so much story content by not doing these things, and then these are the process you do it. And I always find that hidden content, that hidden secret element, interesting because I think it is a natural sharing thing. Because it goes back to that point of people are looking for ways to break the game. I feel like the breaking of systems appeal is so high that some of what you're getting at with discoverability, I think I would be remiss not to acknowledge that side of the community, even if I'm honest, that doesn't always I tend to be like I want to trust the game to give me, and if I just miss it, let it be, unless it's
Oh yeah.
specifically characters.
It really depends on what I'm trying to get out of the game, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, with Metaphor, I have a little bit of a dilemma where
Mm.
like I just finished the third dungeon. I I'm waiting. I have like 16 days before the story can progress, and I'm sort of caught between, okay, I find the side stuff like kind of fun,
Yes.
and I feel compelled to do it because I want to know, okay, am I
Yeah.
missing something?
Yes.
Classic FOMO. Um, but so that could be considered a richer experience. But then equally, okay, if I just got through the game faster, like, I don't think I would mind that.
How
Um, and
that
like I think in these persona type in this
yes.
calendar system type scenario, it feels especially strange because like I could just go to bed every night and just skip to the
Yes.
story. And like that feels like such a wrong way to play the game, right? Um, like on every level that as much as I'm brains towards I wanna just
Right.
barrel through this, I can't bring myself to do it. So it's very interesting.
In something like metaphor, what when you do a side thing, when is it cool, interesting to you? When is it kind of like going back to a disposable side content, right? Like when is it like I'm playing Yakuza on and off, Yakuza Zero, and I'm like,
Hmm.
I am I'm in this conundrum of I just want to do the beat 'em up activities because these beat 'em ups are well designed. I do not want to. The cabaret is a really cool minigame. Like it's actually well conceived and it captures the spirit of the game. So I can't sit down and say I disagree with the ethos. I'm like, it is the ethos. However, what I signed up for is different. And I
Yeah.
notice that I am not always side content driven, but I feel like I am losing the spirit of the game in something like Yakuza. But when I play Persona 5, I don't feel like I'm losing the spirit of the game. I'm like, there's so much side content here. A lot of it, if it doesn't make my stats go up, I'm all right. I can live without it. Where I feel like
Yeah.
at least in Yakuza, it's like the spirit, the essence of what this game is trying to convey. It's a little bit closer to some of the mini games.
Mm. I think with Metaphor, I was kind of struck how, okay, a lot of these optional dungeons, they look kind of boring, they don't
Mm,
seem that interesting. But then somehow I'm playing on hard mode, and
Okay.
with most of them, I always ran into some kind of weird problem. Like
Oh, okay.
there was always a boss giving me a load of trouble, and I really had to think, okay, maybe I need to reconfigure this class a little bit. Maybe I should combine these two things. I think what makes that game really work is the asymmetry between a lot of the things.
Hmm.
I think when I when I got the Seeker archetype, which is like literally the first one that you get, I sort of immediately understood what the game was like going for because okay, this one has the wind spell and no other spells and no other elemental spells. All the other elemental spells are on the mage who only has those spells. He does not have the wind spell. So it's like the game just in its class design is trying to create like weird problems for you.
Mm.
You can't really have a kitchen sink character that like just kind
Okay.
of handles everything. And like then especially you have the whole synthesis thing where okay, you get your most powerful moves when you have specific sets of classes. So okay, you need a knight and a warrior. You need a seeker and a mage to do this skill. And like by saying, okay, if I want this skill, I need this guy to be mage, but then this guy is really bad at being a mage, so that creates so many problems. And it's like, wow, this is really well designed, and I'm shocked how often I was brushing up against those systems by doing these like lame looking dungeons that were actually not that lame.
Interesting. That
Um,
I think that gets to what you've been talking about, where it's like if you can create challenging issues, and it sounds like as opposed to, and you correct me if I'm mishearing you, as opposed to necessarily creating challenging problems, it's the inherently you can't solve everything, and if we can design things that will cause, but inherently will always cause a problem, regardless of what
yeah.
our whatever the problem is that inherently the systems available to you can't solve everything. So you must think differently eventually.
Yeah, like think about it this way, it's much harder to create this type of situation in every other SMT. Because in every other SMT, I can make every Jack Frost do the same thing, you know. Jack Frost is the same as Mara, you know, effectively. Um like if I put enough time in,
Ah,
and
going back.
that's again that's something again I'm that's why I'm so not convinced by that as a
Right.
mechanism, right? Of gating things. Like yeah, if I put in enough time, if I'm stubborn enough, I can just get 80 fire spells on my Jack Frost and make him the most powerful dude on the planet, right? And brute force every problem that way. In Metaphor, they very judiciously designed the systems to not let you do that and um to make it almost like it's a law of the universe in that game that you will have a problem, basically.
Okay. That might be the best selling thing that you ever told me about metaphor. I've been interested in metaphor, but
Hmm.
I hadn't gotten to it. But hearing that
Yeah. I'm
that design
still
ethos, go ahead.
I'm still kind of far away from finishing it.
Yeah.
I've been chipping away at it since release. I mean, we're recording this in the start of June, right?
Yes.
So, but I think it's for the Persona team, the modern Persona team anyway, I think it's clearly their best game. Is I'm and like when I finish it, I'll slap it with the 8 out of 10, you know? So so that's again like but like I think for my sort of metrics, that's like really good. I think I would be surprised if you're like a JRPG head and you don't think this is like the best game ever, yeah? Like
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think about what you're saying and what it might convey to me. Because I like, for example, I'm thinking about Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, one of my favorite games ever.
mhm.
And while you can break the system and be prepared for everything, I thought that was boring. And so times I'm
Mm.
like, okay, I'll let my guy go to jail because I used the wrong spell. That's okay. I will figure out.
Uh,
So like, the way that Tactics Advance works is that on a tactical map, they have a law system where like if you do break this law, guy goes to jail. He's not there for the rest of the battle. And you can break that by having anti-law cards. And actually, some of the cool stuff is that you can create laws to put
what
your
the
enemies in
hell?
challenging positions. Like there are folks who will be like, I'm just gonna put this law and that I'll ruin this team and they can't do anything. The laws, I think, for many people, they hate the law system because they hate being punished. And I'm
Mm.
like, hey, if you really wanted to cheat the game, you have the anti-law cards. But B, I'm like, rearrange your team. Like you got options, or B, make do with the law and see if you can. I feel like the game is give and take. I think it's some of the coolest thing, but I think about that idea of like you can be punished, you can be, and you have to make other choices as a result
Yeah.
of this thing.
That's very interesting. I did not know that about that game at all. I think I did the classic again NPC thing of I booted this up on an emulator once and oh they're doing snowball fighting. Okay, cool. Um, I think this speaks to I think there is a propensity in modern game design to be as player accommodating as possible.
Yes.
Um, this is something that Mark from the Electric Underground he talked about this in his review of Doom of the Dark Ages a lot, where um like if you want to give the player the kitchen sink, be ready for there to just be a lot of problems. Like
Yes.
it's and it's something I think as a developer you're in a tough spot because you're so expected to accommodate for that. I I would have loved a version of Metroid Prime 4 that is tank controls.
Yes.
There was no chance of that ever
No.
happening. You know? Um yeah.
I have two questions for you because that's something I've been thinking about. I think about it in two ways. I forgot the name of this guy, but he tends to over. I think he tends to over describe this, but the phrase that he uses is that there's legacy knowledge and legacy skill. And he feels
Mm,
that the way he often says is that we are not designing for legacy skill, we are designing for folks with no skill.
hmm.
And as a person with no skill, I'm like, what's wrong with us? Like, I don't want to, like, are we
Yeah,
that
yeah.
bad? Are we that scummy
Yeah.
to not deserve? But I think it speaks to that question of what do you do for players to onboard them into a reading of an experience? Because I think
Hmm.
that question is like I had a friend of mine who we talked about why I like weapons breaking, and then he was like in Zelda, and he's like, "Oh, you love that in Fire Emblem too?" I'm like, "Yes, like of course, it's a good." And he's like, "I don't want." He doesn't didn't want it to like influ like. I think in most people's brains, it's like if I've created this solution or I've created this ideal thing. Why are you now going to make me have to adjust once I got there? Where I'm like, to me,
Yeah.
depends. If you design for it, I'm open to trying to meet the. I guess this word. I'm open to trying to meet the game part of the way, and sometimes I feel like, as a player, I'm more willing to say I'm not doing my job to meet the game on its terms. I
Yeah.
think a lot of folks don't want to say that sentence out loud, where I feel like I love Bravely Second. I did not meet that game on its terms until the end of the game. And that's
Mm,
a failure. It's not a failure of their design. In fact, I think the design of the jobs that they provided was so clever and out the box, but I just was not willing to engage with those. I caught myself saying, I want a monk again. I want a white mage because I know what those functions are. And once you give me those functions, yes, give me new things to play with those, but I want the functions that I'm familiar with. They have in Bravely Second this spirit class that modifies all the magic in very unusual ways. And they give you that
mm,
as one of your first classes. And I kept on saying, just give me fire. Just give me. And I was like, I was disappointed in myself. But that's what by the end of the game where I started, okay, let me actually learn the system. I met the game where it was. And I was like, this is genius. But
mm.
I think about for a lot of players, they're not willing to meet unorthodox. They want either legacy skill or legacy knowledge to always transfer. And I guess what do we do with that? I've been trying to answer that question a lot back and forth.
Yeah. I think the fact that society has not tired of having the weapon durability conversation, that proves the whole point that like player accommodation is such a natural impulse and it's gotten only stronger over time. Now I think the whole legacy skill thing, I think I understand where it comes from. I
Yes.
understand the impulse that, well, okay, there's so many games that cater to everybody. like as broad an audience as possible, I want more games to cater to me, right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
I think that is very natural. Now, I think legacy skills specifically as a concept, I don't know if I'm sold on that,
Mm.
as, at least in a single player context.
Mhm.
Because I think as in a single player context, it's like, well, everybody has, you have, you know, basically infinite time to learn it, right? You can take as much time as you, well, you have finite time on this earth, but
Yes.
you can take as long as you want to learn it, and um, like. To me, the idea that okay, I can make an uninviting game, and then I could add extra things to it to make it more inviting, right? And I'm not opposed to that. That's we're
Yeah.
opening
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
the whole accessibility conversation. Um, Personally, not opposed to that. However, I would just as well say, okay, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying you can return to this later when you feel ready, right? Um, I think with sort of competitive games, it's a much thornier issue.
Hmm.
Um. Because I think you have a situation like the way you open up the design is by straight up removing the legacy skill aspect, right? In a single player game, you can have sort of training tools to like
Right.
onboard you better or something. In a competitive game, there needs to be some kind of level playing field. Um, so then the only answer is okay, we need to remove the legacy skill, right? I think you're seeing that with Tekken right now as well, where
Mm.
it's they turn it into this sort of casino clown fiesta where everybody could just strut their stuff and get away with whatever. Um, and um, when you're doing that, you are risking your already existing audience for an audience that might not even be there, right?
Yep.
So I think with competitive games, again, much more complicated issue. Um, And yeah, I think again, legacy skill, that is such a weird word to kind of think about because to me, I think it very concretely means like specific knowledge that transfers to games, right?
Mm.
Like if I know how to do a fireball in one Street Fighter, I know I will know how to do in all of them. To me, that's legacy skill, right?
Right.
And then you could take it a little bit further to like, okay, more theoretical skill that like um Um, oh, if an enemy blocks a heavy attack, I will be in what is called recovery or negative frames, and then I'm susceptible to
Right.
uh, attacks from the enemy, right? That's more theoretical, but that's also a form of legacy skill because it very directly transfers. Um, I think that if you're using the term to very loosely just mean, oh, I'm good at games, so they should make games that I like, I think that's not that useful.
Yes.
It doesn't really help us understand, okay, what should we actually aim for in game design?
Right. When I think bringing it over into RPGs, I wonder if it's a case of, take for example, using Pokemon. I enjoy the Pokemon games a lot.
Yep.
I They anticipate that the normal player is unaware of the basic systems of Pokemon, right?
Hmm.
They really treat the, hey, if you're playing this, this is a likely your first RPG and or your first Pokemon, which
They don't
I
take it
don't
for granted.
and
Oh.
I don't even think that's inherently wrong because often it is true. It is one of those
Hmm.
things where it is an onboarding RPG that exists. But when I've learned about like all the VGC stuff, like all that other layer of Pokemon that exists that I think is well designed, I get so curious about how do you even onboard a person who's new into any of that legacy knowledge? Because I don't think they, not that they don't want to, they're like, the community, fundamentally, they're like, we need to make it easier that they can do it in terms of EV training, all these other things. But ultimately, the community will do it. They will be the ambassadors to each other about reading the game in this way. But we as game designers are not going to funnel you in that direction. And I think that's such an
Mm.
interesting tension for that franchise a lot. And I don't really have clear answers for what they do because I'm like, their core their core existence. as much as people don't like it, as a person's first RPG is actually very important to like the community. As much as folks would be like they hate this, there's a bunch of real reasons not to be interested in Pokemon, but I feel like there are only two franchises right now that are exist as these are your introductions to these genres, and as a result, they serve the community very importantly.
Hmm.
Pokemon and Kirby are both of like they do their jobs well and they have high level stuff afterwards, but they do their jobs well. And would want something deeper as a Pokemon experience that's not tied to the multiplayer community, but I don't know what
Yeah.
to do to convey the legacy skill that those folks have gained.
It's funny because the my impression of the Pokemon meta as someone who's like not involved
Yeah.
with it at all is that it's something that naturally emerges from how rich the systems kind of always were. And it's something that Game Freak they tolerated, but they don't really cultivate it actively.
Mm.
And I mean, the cynical read on it is like, well, to their bottom line, it doesn't really
Right.
matter,
Right.
right? Whether they cultivate it. The best approach is to tolerate it and then because I'm sorry, Pokemon fans are stuck in this abusive relationship, right? So it doesn't matter how bad the onboarding and the tutorialization, the forced tutorialization gets in the later games, they will stick through it. You know, the Stockholm
I
syndrome
mean,
runs that deep. Um,
you're speaking to one of the people who still pro Pokemon, so I get it. You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
yeah. So for them, it just makes sense to design it that way,
Yeah.
right? I think, yeah, as a game designer, you again, as much as I'm death of the author, right? I don't really want to overanalyze sort of intent. But I do appreciate when a game has strong conviction and um I think you just really need to be sure, okay, who's my audience, right? And you need to be
That's the
happy
thing.
with not with that answer being not everybody.
That's
And that's something that I mean as a game designer as a game designer in big quotes air quotes who can't currently live off of like my game design activity. I naively say, yeah, I'm comfortable with that. With okay, I'm gonna make niche games. How comfortable I am with that in like 5 years?
yeah. It's a different.
No idea, but yeah.
What what allows you to outside of just like obviously the theoretical stuff, but to be more. What would allow a developer to be fine with those answers of not being everyone? I've been thinking about that, right? In the RPG space, to kind of pull it back here, we often say our community is small. Now, nuances to that conversation about whether or how small we really are.
GK has the best take on it. Like,
Yes, I don't know if I fully agree with him, but I get he has the right lens.
look at rail shooter fans. Okay, like,
Look at rail shooter fans, look at music game fans. Like, there are people in worse scenarios than we are.
yeah.
I think the question I've always wondered is this who is our audience supposed to be? I think that's like if you really cut down all of our infighting, I think that's the question. We took
Hmm.
for granted at one point in time that our audience was everyone. Like we believed that I would say from the years of 1997, the release of Final Fantasy 7, to basically 2005, that we were guaranteed that if we made a good game, everyone would play it. That was the. I would argue that that's how why all these arguments happen now. That we believed that our audience was everyone.
Hmm.
But the real answer is there's only two franchises that are really for everyone, and everyone else is a smaller audience. It's Pokemon is for everyone, and Final Fantasy believes it's for everyone.
Yes, yes, yes. That's
and,
perfect.
and everyone else has kind of had to sit and contemplate we are not for everyone. So what does that mean? Both on how the game should be designed, but for us as fans, for what we're actually asking for. And I've been stewing on that, right? Like I
Hmm.
ask my friends who are non-Final Fantasy players, like what would it even take for that game to intrigue you, right? because in their brains, right? Like over in Square Enix, they're like, we got four RPGs. Two of them are for everyone. Two of them are for people who we like, but they're not really our important audience. They're like Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts are for everyone. Dragon Quest is just for home, and we are trying to make Mana work. Like I think that's their entire
Mm,
brand is like we have four real RPGs. Two of them are supposed to do the job, and I think they're coming up on the question of like maybe our audience isn't everyone as much as everyone says that it should be. And I think that's a hard. I think the audience, in terms of all RPG fans and Square, are wrestling with that answer.
hmm.
Because in my mind, I'm like, I have accepted it's okay if they go after everyone, but it affects their design ethos, and I
Yeah.
don't know what they do with that. I'm not the glory days Final Fantasy person in terms of like I'm playing Final Fantasy 7 now. I played Final Fantasy 9 2 years ago, so I'm new to classic Final Fantasy. But I wonder for them that question of do they just embrace that at most at any moment in time there's 10 million people who will show up and really
Hmm.
just accept, and if they did accept that, what would they design for if there's only 10 million people who would look at this game? Like, does it change it?
Yeah. There was this extra credits video, um, where they sort of proposed the idea that okay, JRPGs in that span of time that you mentioned from 1997, maybe even we could
Yeah.
sort of start in the Super Nintendo era as well.
Yeah.
Um, to like the aughts, they had a monopoly on long form storytelling as a concept.
Yep.
And as games evolved, that just became less and less the case. Other genres were able to do that. Western RPGs, proliferated on console. It's
Yep.
like it, all the and then Call of Duty, right? Had it was the idea of oh, we can have RPG systems in an action game, right? That's
Yes.
like we base it's basically every corner of the industry just took launch money from JRPGs, and uh, I think I think it's both that and then sort of the confusing nature of the kind of inherently contradictory like JRPG tropes, right? Where like I think you can never quite definitively answer, okay, like what is like the core like gameplay loop of a JRPG other than progression, right? Other than progression and like storytelling maybe as concepts and okay, sort of more tactical, laid back combat. Like those kinds of things are vaguely understood to be part of the formula.
Yes.
Um, but then if you ask different people, they will give you vastly different answers,
Yes.
right? Some people will say, "Oh, it is like a hardcore experience, like if you really get into it." Some people will say, "Well, I kind of like that it's actually repetitive and
Yes.
um that I can sort of play it on the side, right?" And and then like these tropes, a lot of these baked in tropes that haven't really been shackled, they're um they're so unclear in what they're trying to accomplish, right? If
Mm.
we're thinking about something like random encounters, right? Is it supposed to be a constant resource drain, a constant resource stress, or is it supposed to be kind of this chill thing that you don't really worry about? Like, there's no clear answer,
Yes.
and I think it is because like a lot of that stuff just was never really thoroughly re-examined, and then you see attempts like FF16, for example, that try to just not worry about it for the most part. They try to take influences from other games, and then that is like weirdly received. And like, I mean, I'm worried that they take the wrong lessons from 16's relatively like muted reception. You have stuff like 12 that as someone who hasn't like played it that much, I would consider it a pretty interesting visionary game. Um, was not well received. Well, I don't know. I got good reviews, but like I just remember there was so much like
Yes.
polarizing discourse around it. Um,
I would I would maybe begin to think that maybe I feel weird saying this because this is not my design ethos. Maybe the truth is that Final Fantasy is best as an MMO, right? Like I'm thinking about like community response to 14 is up here. I can't.
Yeah,
I've never played 14, but even 11 has kind of built a framing. 12 is, as you said, upon release had this weird convo, but I think people have kind of accepted the design ethos
for sure.
that you might argue that that maybe is the real, again, now as a person who's experienced these things, but if you're talking about like reception being important and a question of their answer to how do we get more people to engage in the space, like that might be the thing staring at them in the face that they know,
Yeah.
but they just can't. I think they would be like, if they answered that this is really the answer, there's a huge conversation to happen afterwards. And I think answers your questions of, oh, so then the resource, the answer to JRPGs, what are they designed for, is time. I think that's what would be the scary answer that's out in public. Because if we accept that Final Fantasy is best received as an MMO, which with no diss to MMO design, that is the most time gated content ever.
Yeah.
I think you break. I think you break is not the word. I think the conversations you and I are having come so much more to the front that I think you almost implode the genre almost because
Hmm.
then it's like all the other things I do like about the genre that I think are important. I think what folks who don't care about it would be like, no, the answer is always been time. And I think that's a scary place to be in because I think if
Yeah.
that's the answer, I don't know what we're left with as a genre. We're not left with much now, right? Like, let's, as you said, there's no clear answers. But I think if FF were to accept that maybe the answer is time to all these questions that we're having, the genre almost kind of like, ooh, I don't want to say this. All the gotcha people become correct. That becomes a very different. I think the genre really changes face because it's like, oh, the gotcha people were always right the whole time. What does that mean?
Yeah. See, now that you're saying that, like, I have this sort of snap realization that, okay, the FF6 guys of, the 90s, are they the Genshin Impact guys of today? The Genshin Impact kids, is that the equivalent?
It, as a person who's avoided those type of games,
Yeah.
it it's a very interesting question. I
Yeah.
want to immediately say no, but if we're cynical to say again, maybe they have an answer to this question that doesn't involve time. But if the answer is time, right? Cynically, you have to say that, oh, Genshin Impact is the answer, or Zenless Zone Zero, I think is the other one. Like,
Hmm.
you start having to say maybe these are the answers, and the only folks where that answer is not true are all the tactical JRPGs. Because a
Hmm.
lot of the things that we're having about repetitive encounters don't operate in the same philosophy. Like Fire Emblem has this interesting thing where they have more bespoke battles, and therefore they don't run into this problem as quick. But even I haven't played Valkyria Chronicles, but more like the entire tactical genre has to have designed battles, and therefore they even if they throw the we're gonna have filler time or filler battles, they have
Hmm.
enough other content that's designed for problem solving that they I think they leave this conversation fine. I think it's I love Dragon Quest. I think it's something like Dragon Quest where they'll be like, are you left with anything if time is removed? And I want to say yes, but cynically, maybe the answer is no.
Hmm.
Like Pokemon gets to escape on its multiplayer aspect where it's like, oh, that's what Pokemon is. Like, I think if we accept that time is the problem here, I think the genre changes a lot. Go for it, sorry.
I had something just now. I kind of lost it. Oh yeah. Okay. Fire Emblem, I think is interesting to look at for what it's wrestling with because I think it's hard to deny that it was like I have problems with sort of the core system or structure of Fire Emblem, right? But that's beside the point, right? We can acknowledge, okay, These are relatively, for what they are, tight games that funnel you forward, where you're constantly moving. You have these bespoke maps. Even Fire Emblem now has embraced leisure
Yes.
time. It's embraced
Yes.
slowing you down. It's embraced
Yes.
um like grinding as a concept is you it should be so anti-Fire Emblem, and yet
Right.
the latest Fire Emblem, we're in a school and we're doing
Yes.
all these outside activities that have nothing to do with like the core mechanics to somehow make everything around it kind of richer.
Yes.
And there's not like I'm so radical that like for me there's an instant rejection of that.
Yes.
But that's not a normal reaction, really, clearly.
No.
That's not
I
a widespread feeling at all.
I had a conversation with one of my friends. I plan to buy Fire Emblem Engage at some point in time, and he's like, "Why would you buy that? Because it doesn't have all these other things, in particular, good story, but not just good story, the connections that you're building with characters, like, it is more clearly superfluous in Engage from our understanding." And to me, that's appealing because I'm like, "Oh, that means I just go straight to the meat of the game." But for
Hmm.
everyone else who talks about Engage and Fire Emblem Three Houses, it's like, oh, it's a Three Houses. I thought was expanding it to someone like me, a person who, and it's like, I think that's why I think they're in a unique spot. If I were them, my dream world is that they alternate games, right? Like I think you
Yeah.
alternate something that's more clearly the folks who grew up on FE7 who are willing to enjoy a game for the sake of design, and then you meet people halfway with the more Three Houses design. Because
Hmm.
as a person who heard what Three Houses was, I didn't buy it because I was like, oh, this sounds like a time sink that I won't enjoy. But the one thing that Fire Emblem has going for it that makes those superfluous things matter, and it's funny, right? Because I think I know what you're going to tell me. Because of the presence of permadeath, spending tea time with your character or whatever is always going to make the in battle stuff hold weight. But I think
Hmm.
if I were to guess, the first thing you would say is I think Fire Emblem's starting to get ashamed of permadeath, right? With some of the changes they've made over the years, and therefore that doesn't hold as much weight. But go for
I think that is valid. Honestly, it's not the first thing I would jump to.
it.
Um, I think there is like a logical connection to what you're saying for
Yeah.
sure. Um, I think it's I guess see I would look more at like okay, what is sort of the construction of like permanent as a concept? Like what is how really watertight is the idea even?
Yes.
Um, um, I think see that's a whole can of worms. Maybe I shouldn't open it, right?
No,
I
you're good.
guess yeah. So I guess the thing I want to focus on a little bit. I want to explain my situation earlier with a
Yes.
game like Three Houses where okay, one thing that I had a really visceral reaction to is that, and it's a clip that I post all the time, where I get a quest from the blacksmith or whatever. He
Yeah.
says, "Get this material for me." I walk like 5 meters backward, meters, inches. You know,
Yes.
I'm a Euro. I see a glowing spot on the ground. Literally, the blacksmith is still like in my field of view. I pick up the thing. It's the material that he's looking for. Whoa. I take the material back to him. I finish the quest. Um, I had such a viscerally negative reaction to that that like the to me that's such a blatant the game thinks I'm stupid, right? Like the game thinks, oh, I can hold this carrot in front of you and like you're gonna feel good about it. Like you did this crazy accomplishment, and it's such a blatant kind of waste of time. Um, I don't know if I quit the game then and there, but like I definitely didn't finish it, yeah. And it's I I guess I want to go back to the idea that like that 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 reaction is insane, right? That's like clearly not normal. And I was playing Breath Bravely Default for this, right, in preparation. And I sort of I made a flippant kind of post about it on Blue Sky where I said like, yeah, like bro, they're setting up this gameplay. It's taking 2 hours, right? I'm 2 hours into this, and like I'm still the stuff I'm doing is like less complex than the first Sephiroth I
Right.
played, you know? And I'm just so stuck in like thinking about it in those categories. I can't really shake that feeling ever. And I the question is like whether that's a problem for the genre, right? Is
Right.
that because like clearly I think most people are not this extreme with their with their preferences
N-
as I am.
No.
Um
I think this goes back to something we said off pre-show though. It the way that you are looking at the genre is coming from a space that used to be present in like more people like you used to be present, right? Like,
mhm.
and I've been thinking a lot about it feels like from my vantage point that folks with your knowledge and framework used to be as present as everyone else, right? Like we had these repetitive issues back in Earthbound or whatever, right? Like so it's not as if this dichotomy has always never existed. It's always been present, but it always felt like we were in concert to have this conversation together.
Yeah.
I feel like now anybody who I don't want to stereotype people. I feel like if you came to games after the year 2003, some of the things that you and I are discussing do not even register in your frame
Yeah.
of understanding about the design of games. And I've been trying to consider how do we keep some of this I think you talk about maybe we haven't talked about it's like why did I want to do this podcast? I think the knowledge that we're sharing is cool, but I think this tension should always exist, right? Like it
Yes.
existed in the '90s, and I don't think it should go one direction or the other, right? Like I think if you talk to people, going back to some of the things where you say you talk to your friends and they don't want to admit certain things, they genuinely believe because there was a time for like 3 4 years where like if they admit some of the things that you and I are saying and admitting, our genre can be kind of like whoosh, thrown over. And the truth answer is that we were on handhelds where that was going. If you never cared about handheld design, we were already out of the space for people that they
Yeah.
actually there's people. This sounds bad. I think a lot of my peers have not accepted that we are in a post 2017 world and they're looking at the conversations strictly as if it's 2014. And I'm like, we are not. I had to catch myself in my language and I'm like, we are not here anymore. We can have more honest conversations and it doesn't have to be reductive. But I
Mhm.
also feel like the people who are challenging us are not people like you, where I feel like you are coming from a I've said this to you before. The essence of game design, where I feel like the people who are speaking to us are folks are like, no, make it more like our Western RPG over here, or more make it more like this big budget. Like their solutions are things that, with no, with no need to belittle them, don't intrigue me because I'm like that's not the
Mhm.
essence of our medium. Talking to you, I'm like, no, I'm speaking with, and I don't know I've been trying to figure out, I was like, for folks who I think are coming from your frame point, where are the rest of you? A, but B, like, how do we make, what is the connection back to people like you? Because even when I think folks in your space can overcorrect, I'm like, it's important that it's, people need to breathe the air of it, of the conversations we're having. They need to have it.
Mhm. I I have a big sort of slant for condescension, unfortunately. I mean, I used to be way crazier on Twitter, right? It, some of my best friends now, I don't know if you Pale Violet Blue Kudo on Twitter,
I think
Von
I just
B.
followed them recently.
Yeah. Like literally a super good friend of mine now, and we like met in Chicago. It was super awesome. My first interaction with him was like so contentious. He made a post about he made one of those like SMT Nocturne like aesthetic posts like wow this they need to remaster this blah blah, and I just came into his replies like you fucking idiot, what is this bullshit, this game is so stupid and bad, like why do you like this? um and like I've been trying to like really like re-examine my behavior in the years since, right? Like really chill out a little bit.
Mm.
And the reason I'm saying all this is like to this day, right? I still get tunnel vision, right? I
Yeah.
still something like FF7 Rebirth sounds really bad, but like to me it's so obviously bad, right? And like when I listen to a podcast where people just are so excited about it and like I'm like intellectually, rationally, no, bless their hearts, they should
Yeah.
like it. There's nothing wrong with liking it. When I'm listening to it, I'm like, how are we so different? How is it possible to be so different as humans? Like we are on the same planet, we're breathing the same air. Like,
It, I will say this.
um,
Having played, just quick aside, having played FF7 OG, I now understand why people said a whole bunch of weird things over the last two
oh yeah,
decades.
oh yeah.
One of those are like, FF7 is such a good game, but I can now see how if you're a person who's more skeptical RPGs looking at it, you're like, oh yeah, we should make an entire thing that's built in this way. Like compared to nine, which is what I played before, I was just like, nine is this sounds bad. Nine is sure of itself as a designed game.
Hmm.
I think seven is slightly embarrassed is not the word. I think sometimes it's like I think it's a I think sometimes it wishes it were something else sometimes.
Okay.
That's my this is from a person who thinks it's well designed, but there are now there are moments in that game I'm like, oh, you don't wish you wish you weren't an RPG at this moment. And I think now I could see how we end up in all of these other conversations about rebirth. Because I'm like, oh, anyone who plays FF7 with a modern lens is like, oh yeah, it never really wanted to be RPG in the first place.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, I understand. It, yeah, just something I was like thinking about some of your, maybe some of your criticisms of Rebirth, the ones I've always heard about like, why is it such a mini game fest? I'm like, looking at the
Yeah.
original, I'm like, I'm not surprised. Like, it makes
Yeah,
sense
yeah.
how we ended up here.
It's the whole thing.
Yes.
Where I was going with this a little bit
Yeah.
is that you were asking, okay,
Yeah.
how do we have those conversations in a more
Yeah.
productive way? When I sort of look at my action game bubble,
Mhm.
I'm looking at my own propensity for condescension and like isolation and war, right? And um that and that's bad. I know it's bad, and I try to be as self-aware of it as possible. And like I also know it's really common in other gaming
Yeah.
spaces, other game communities, and like in my community as well, where I feel like I very consistently preach this idea of like, okay, stop the subtweeting, just reply to the person. Like, and then once you're in the reply box, I think there's something psychological that happens where like, okay, I shouldn't be an asshole right now, right? And then I think it just snowballs into something that is much more useful for humanity. Um, I think that's the way to go, right? And there's this indie dev that I follow, Boghog. We talk a bunch. He's worked on a couple shmups as well, and he's working on an action game right now. And I think he's even said like, yeah, there's so many like discords where you can imagine people are having entire podcasts worth of
Yes.
conversations that are just exclusive to them, right? And I'm not saying obviously this is great, but not everything has to be content. But at the
Yes.
same time, um, if you could somehow make something productive out of it, I think why not? And I think that's again that's what we were kind of doing with Beach Den Game Club as well. Because I think we're a very again not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but like a very unique um set of characters, right?
Yes.
Where and I say characters like sort of in like a derogatory way, right? Where we're all just a little quirky and like a little extreme. And um I think again if you I don't want to plug Beach
Yeah,
Gen
yeah.
too
No,
hard, right? But
you
like
can plug it. It's more than
the
fine. Yeah.
promo is very shameless right now. But like I think if you listen to Beach Gen, maybe you'll realize okay, we have also our own form of tunnel vision, right? We have a very specific thing that we look for, and like we had this one podcast about Eco, for example, which I think is a great game. Everybody was just relentless about it and like being really mean to it, and I think it's a type of analysis of eco that you haven't really heard before. And again, I don't want to build up
Yeah.
too much, but like it is interesting, and I just wonder how much more that would happen if people were more open to like just really be themselves, and to really say it in public.
Yes. I think saying in public and being curious has been,
Y yes.
that
Yes.
is more than anything, that has been kind of like my guiding light to finding people if they're, are their takes interesting in terms of, but are they also curious? I think that's what I think has been important. And I think that's why I'm like, A, I think this is why this is a good conversation, but B, these, even coming from different vantage points, I think can lead to, hold on, my cat is trying to eat my charger. Can lead to fruitful conversation. I think if people are not having conversations from just desperation,
Oh yeah.
which I think is, as I said, I think folks from my side of the world tend to like operate in 2014 brain, or if we say the wrong things, we might. And I'm like, we're past that right now. Maybe we'll be back there in a few years, who knows? But for now,
The
music
Switch
fans,
saved
listen.
y'all. The Switch did it
When
single-handedly.
I tell you, I have a whole thing about AA RPGs are saved by the Switch, and that made our lives so much better. It has been, yes, yes. I love HD 2D. I love Triangle Trap. There's a whole bunch of like ethos, and I'm like, without. I know that for many folks, they're like, I'm a Nintendo fan, and I'm like, I get it, but this is objectively true. I do not think some of where we are now as a genre happens without the Switch kind of telling people it's okay to like this kind of game.
Like literally, Dragon Quest 12.
Yes.
We don't know this for a fact, right? But we kind of know. Okay, that game is in a development deadlock because they were waiting for the Switch 2. Yeah,
Yes.
because they knew
Exactly.
they knew there was no point dropping it beforehand.
Yes. And I, again, I know what it'll make me sound like, but I'll say it's like, I don't know if the cultural reappraisal of Dragon Quest happens without what the Switch ends up doing. Like, I played
Hmm.
11 on PS4, enjoyed it there, but I'm just like, I, there's a little bit more positive Dragon Quest energy in the universe, and I think that is very much a Nintendo sanctioned thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, no, I'm with you. And I say that to say I hope that folks from my area are more open, and I think it also I hope they're more curious. I think that's the spirit of that, and I'm hoping that folks get something from our convo. And I guess that leads to my two things. One, if there's something about game design you hope folks from my area, let's say that somebody's favorite RPG is Persona 4 Golden, right? Like, what are you hoping them to think about differently about the experience? Not necessarily to hate it, but
Ooh.
just like to recontextualize, re-examine about repetitive encounters, but anything else, really.
If I had to sum it up in one sentence, it's just okay. Really think about what am I doing right now? What is this
Mm.
thing that I'm doing right now? What is what is this accomplishing as an artistic experience, right? Um, that sounds like such a surface level way to put it, but
No.
I think bringing it back to the super basic level, like, okay, is it? I see. I'm not like a crazy cinephile. I think people have this idea that I'm like super condescending about movies, like, ooh, I watch movies and I'm so cool. Um, I do have a letterbox account, right? I do watch a lot of movies, and it's again, it's sort of a cheap gotcha against games to use that. But I can't help but think like, okay, Oppenheimer is a long ass movie, and that's 3 hours, right? Um, like think about the idea that a film is the entire concept of film is it's an intentional sequence of images, right?
Yes.
And um, if you really consider, okay, how much richness you can get from like 90 to 3 hours of experience of like directed intentionality. Why are we not looking at games with the same lens? Why is that not something we kind of take for granted more?
Mm.
I think that is really that is the main thing I always bang on about.
I'm with you. I like that framing. I think I think twofold. I think it there's a plurality to gaming I try to hold where I'm like a
Hmm.
game that's an hour is great as a game as a 60-hour game, right? Like that's
Oh
my
yeah.
if I believe in anything, I believe in that. And I think this has always been true, but I think even now people struggle with that tension of can a short experience be meaningful? And even if it's a short experience, it must be sold as a short experience with less amount of money, less budget, and therefore it is now meaningful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've always found it interesting as a person who believes in the a great game can be 5 hours. This is why why I played the beat 'em ups. I played Streets of Rage 2 because it was 3 hours. Because I was like, I want a short, get in and get out experience. I've always found it so interesting, but I say all of that, but I always end up in these places where I'm like, I'm gonna put 70 hours into it to Xenoblade. And I don't regret that choice, but I sit in that weird dichotomy of like both can coexist, but I think some
Yeah.
folks in my space, even if they're not RPG fans, struggle with the fact of 5 hours can be great, 3 hours can be great, and maybe there is a experience there that can be useful. I say that to say maybe my follow up to your statement is play Cosmic Star Heroine, not to you, but just like someone listening to you, because I think it speaks to the idea that you could accomplish a lot of what we're talking about as my favorite things about JRPGs in,
Hmm.
I think Cosmic Star Heroine is about 8 hours,
Mm.
and it can accomplish some of what we're speaking to.
That is a game that was also recommended to me a couple times by people who are pretty discerning sort of about decision making and kind of rich combat and stuff. So that is something that's always been on my list.
Yes. Yeah, I'm curious what you'd walk away with. Their
Hmm.
solution is by minimizing resources from the get-go. Like every battle, in order to do choices, each choice is a resource, and in order to, you have to take a turn to recharge every resource, or you have to do, I forget something else. And so therefore, you always feel limited in what you can do. And so
Hmm.
therefore, thinking about what you've talked about, where you like more constrained choice and options, the battles kind of feel a little bit different. Like I feel like it's the way they do it feels different than just saying I have such and such MP, right? Like it is the action has can only be used once or twice, and then some actions can't be used more than once in battle. Yeah, I'm curious what you'd walk away with. That's actually
Hmm.
yeah. All that to say, for folks from my side of the world, play that and see if it accomplishes some of what we're talking about here. And my last question is, since it's an episode of Menu Combat, we should always mention some form of music. I'll
Hell yeah.
mention the song I've been listening to that I've enjoyed. There's another Tales of Symphonia song, "In the Ashes" by Motoi Sakuraba, and I'm just people have heard me say this phrase so many times. Droned out chanting is just such a easy way to create this like very dark, uh, mysterious atmosphere, and in particular, he plays it in different keys. It's always just quite engaging, and then they have a light piano playing on top of it, and they engage in like the wind sound effects. It's one of those things where I'm like, Sakuraba is the most hit or miss JRPG composer in history. When he's bad, it's awful. When he's great, it's like sensational, and this speaks to that. He was incredible here, and I might start having to think about Tales of Symphonia as an OST in conversations as like some of the greatest JRPG soundtracks. I might have to read.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
that is my pick of the song for the week. What is your pick of a song?
I was telling you in the pre-show that I had some anxiety over this because I had the impression that my answer is the most basic bitch answer possible. The Shin Megami Tensei 4 OST, to me it seems like pretty obvious. Okay, everybody knows this is the most amazing soundtrack. Like everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. And especially, I mean, every theme is great.
Yes.
Every single song is great. The the two that I'm stuck on are kind of the most obvious ones that so that kind of frustrates me. I'm not boring you with the selection. Um, obviously the Tokyo theme, to me, the fact that it is so serene and like adventurous, it has this like very this that's in this post-apocalyptic wasteland, the fact that it makes that feel so wondrous is really special, especially with how they again you go through this fuck ass nightmare dungeon and the just this juxtaposition of like geography is so I don't want to spoil it too much, right? But the fact that that's the first thing you're hit with after that peak. But then I think the real thing I want to focus on is the main theme of the game, which again seems so boring, but like what a 2 minute banger. It has that obviously super ominous droning bass, like deep bass droning, bit by bit builds up to this insanely epic drop in the middle. And then just goes in with the again more droning and more drums. And then eventually the synths kind of come in. It's like da 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 da. It's so epic. And I think it really expresses a lot about just how ominous, dark, spiraling the entire game is. Um, yeah, peak.
Nice, nice. One day I'll be back playing SMT4. That is
Oh wow, you haven't played it or you
I've
haven't finished
only
it.
played a Nocturne up until I got walled by the leopard.
Okay.
That's where I'm stuck in Nocturne. I I wanted to be one of the cool kids. Everybody who was like, "Oh man, don't play Persona, play SMT." So I bought Nocturne before I played Persona 5. And I hate to admit that I got walled in Persona in SMT and I went to play Persona 5. I'm now hoping that now that I've figured out how Persona works from a mechanic standpoint, I can come back to Nocturne eventually. But
Yeah.
I think my goal sometime this year is to start Persona 4 Golden and
Okay.
then
Yeah,
work.
I had the much more basic experience of like I played Persona for Golden because like all the games journalists told me it was the best game on the PlayStation Vita. And you know, as I was explaining to you earlier, and I think I had a for that reason I had a much smoother on-ramp. But yeah, SMT4 is like I think we talked about this idea of like admittance with Bravely Default. That like well, it just lets you turn the encounters off. It kind of admits that it's not a compelling thing. Um, I think SMT4 is like kind of a different flavor of that, where okay, eventually the combat goes so fast and like it's so automated that they kind of acknowledge I think they put the most interesting stuff first and foremost, and I think in that way maybe it's similar to Bravely Default. That's sort of what I'm getting from the game, from Bravely Default. Again, I'm very curious how I'll feel at 4 once I revisit it, but maybe next season of Menu Combat.
Yeah, I mean maybe even later this season. Yeah, this is always it is I think the most interesting thing, and this is why I'm always excited about talking about games, but like talking about the genre is like the more I get to explore in the genre, I think it always changes my perspective. And I'm always so far, right? Like I'm not I wish I could sit down and say I'm the person who's played 500 JRPGs. I'm like funny enough to make a point of time. Because of my limited time resource in real life, I cannot
Yeah.
make that. And so it always makes me feel like I'm always learning something and seeing things differently every time I go to an experience, even for some of the more mundane ones. And I'm scared for the day I go back to Bravely Default in the perspective of, how do I say it? I love the story of Bravely Default. I know what I'm going to hate going back to, and it's not what people hate. The thing that people hate is
Mm,
actually the most bold thing about that game, and I will always say it is the best design aspect. I don't. Do you know anything about
I
it?
have a vague idea
Okay,
of what it is.
I'll leave
Yeah.
it as vague. The thing that people mostly hate about the story is actually the strongest thing. So I disagree with that take. Especially, yeah. I'm curious what if you get that far, what choices you will make. But there's another part of that game that I'm like, this is awful, and I think I would know it now more than I did then. But I get so lost in job, going back to the idea of menu combat, customizing my job, preparing, and I think this my last thing was I think RPGs are designed for folks with bad strategy. And I don't mean that in like a negative sense. I'm like the idea is that thinking about what I said with Bravely Second earlier. I did not understand the tools at my disposal till endgame. And I think a game wants to
Mm,
accommodate bad constructions of builds because it shouldn't always be ideally built, right? Like a player playing the game, unless they've broken the game before, they should have some mediocre strategies, mediocre output, and the game should be prepared for that as much as it's prepared for good and bad strategies.
hmm.
So, on that note, I thank you for your time. This is great. Where do people find you? And if you're to plug one Beach Gen Game Club episode, which one do you plug?
Ooh. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This was really awesome. This was a really great conversation. I thought we covered a lot of stuff and um I think we really got down and dirty with a lot of
Yes.
fundamental kind of issues. Um yeah, so Beach Gen Game Club, you'll find it on YouTube if you type. I think we're in the SEO graces, we're sort of there enough that you will find it.
Yes.
The episode I would recommend to you, boring answer, but like at the time of this recording, our most recent one on Crazy Taxi, I think that is one of the most insightful episodes that we have done on a game that is like pretty misunderstood. Uh, Legendary IGN quote: "This game has almost no depth, but that's okay." Uh, if you
Oh,
listen to us talk about it, maybe you'll find that that statement is not completely accurate. So please give that a shot. And then generally, again, I'm Ziad, Ziad with three D's on Blue Sky. I'm Wonder Magenta on Twitter. I'm at Ziad Bruh, so BRUH on YouTube. I've been streaming a lot more.
yeah.
Same name on Twitch as well.
And I'll just plug this. If you guys donate enough, maybe we can get into play Death by Degrees. That's been my hidden dream.
Yes. That's what we were thinking about.
Yes. What did you
Um,
stream recently? You played something. What did I watch? Oh, it was The Bouncers. What I last watched.
yeah, the bouncer. We did finish the bouncer. We did some bouncing. No sports bra.
On that note, thank you for this episode, and thank you for the listeners who have spent some time. You can find me, the Wolves Den 25, on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. You can find Menu Combat on Blue Sky on Twitter, and always don't forget to pause and customize your party.